this was the scene inside the press conference that everyone saw, but was poorly interpreted, I thought. That's what's her name? Oksana Markarova, the Ukrainian ambassador, who we would often see in Washington doing photo ops with proxy war cheerleaders, signing away Ukraine's critical assets, its public assets. There's a sign on the embassy, which is her office down on M Street in Georgetown, that says Ukraine is open for business. It's basically like, come on, BlackRock, and have all you want. She threw out the first pitch at a Washington Nationals game and actually has a better arm than Barack Obama. She did a pretty good job throwing out the first pitch. But for some reason, she couldn't give Zelensky the advice he needed going into this meeting, which is to, first of all, suffer through Donald Trump's browbeating to the extent that there was any, like King Abdullah from Jordan did. You don't want to irritate Donald Trump, especially when they're already angry at you and they've called you a dictator, and you need to get these security guarantees. You need to keep some of the weapons flowing. But he did so. He couldn't control himself. He wasn't advised properly. He's never been advised. It turns out Zelensky has never really had true Ukrainian advisors. Arestovich isn't working for him anymore for a reason. His advice is all coming from NATO and the US. And it was American advisors or dual Ukrainian American citizens who were his consultants on his 2019 political campaign, where he turned a reality TV show into reality and became his cabinet ministers to help him sell off his country to the West. So, of course, he walked into it. It wasn't an ambush. He just walked into a meeting without any preparation because Ukraine has no sovereignty. He's not a true Ukrainian leader. And he, throughout this whole time, had been entitled and pampered by the real forces that animated him, which were one of the power mafias in Washington, fronted by the Biden administration, which is no longer in power, no longer has power, and its transatlantic vassals in Europe who are now trying to find their own voice. So I think this meeting and the meltdown that occurred and the anger that we saw, the fire and fury, it was all the kind of natural outcome of a leader who had no idea that he wasn't actually leading anything. He was just a proxy. He was just a servant, and the servant doesn't actually get invited to dinner. He wasn't even welcome in the negotiations.
His own Ukrainian advisors warned about this. There was that cover story in Time magazine, like about a year after they named Zelensky the person of the year. Simon Schuster of Time magazine, who's like embedded inside Zelensky's circle, has a lot of contacts there, wrote an article basically saying that Zelensky's delusional. Zelensky's belief in Ukraine's ultimate victory over Russia has hardened into a form that worries some of his advisors. It is immovable, verging on the messianic. Quote, he deludes himself. We're out of options. We're not winning, but try telling him that. So people close to him were warning about this more than a year ago, but he chose not to listen to his own people, but to people in Washington and NATO think tanks and NATO leaders puffing him up because he was serving their goal of using his country to bleed Russia. And as you said, it finally caught up with him when he went to the White House, and so entitled, someone who's like bought into his own news clippings so much that he couldn't see the signals right in front of him, like a president and a vice president who are not on board with this anymore. And to the point about who he's listening to, it was French officials who helped him craft his sort of half apology to Trump. The French government took a major part in helping Zelensky draft. In fact, there's even one report that they helped write part of his statement so basically trying to walk back his confrontation with Trump and trying to turn over a new leaf. It just speaks to how people on the outside have used him and his country for their own ends and how it's been a disaster for everybody.
Yeah, but he's been spoiled and entitled by the last administration. And the Trump administration before that gave him offensive weaponry, javelins, and Trump seemed so boxed in at that time that Zelensky's position was completely secure. And I think, no one was more thrown off by this. I wasn't thrown off at all. Someone told me, like, turn on CNN, or whatever, just turn on the TV. It was like when I was a kid and the Challenger had just exploded, except that was sad and this wasn't. I was like, oh, this is happening. And I wasn't shocked at all. I was just sort of amused by the spectacle. But people like Christiane Amanpour, who is one of the key voices and stenographers of the transatlantic elite that brought us the Ukraine proxy war, this is her reaction immediately after the exchange in the Oval Office, as though it was something that, well, obviously it was the beginning of their worst nightmare, but this class of people was not prepared for it. And I think it's leading to some pretty poor decision making in Europe.
Yeah, well, what happened this week in Europe? They had basically what they billed as a war summit, the European Union, talking about how we're going to spend more on the military. There's talk about Germany trying to develop nuclear weapons. I mean, people are just going nuts because they've all doubled down on this proxy war strategy, and now left without, or now at least facing the absence of their biggest sponsor, they're in crisis. And what did Trump do this week? He cut off intelligence sharing to Ukraine and also paused the weapons. And what did that show? I mean, not only does this make it hard or impossible for Ukraine to launch strikes into Russia now because they rely on U.S. intelligence, we also learned that basically the UK, their weapons won't work either because that relies on U.S. intelligence too. So these storm shadows that Ukraine's been using to strike Russian targets, Ukraine can't use that now either because the U.S. has cut them off. It just underscores that the main actor here all along has not been Ukraine or their partners. It's been the chief sponsor in Washington.
Yeah, this is the Daily Mail. The British supplied Storm Shadow missiles are useless in Ukraine now. President Trump has blocked U.S. intelligence from sharing with allies. Vladimir Putin stated explicitly when the transfer of Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine's military were first put on the table that these missiles could not be launched deep into Russian territory without U.S. satellite assistance. This was also the case for the longer range HIMARS systems, but in this case, it relies entirely on U.S. satellite data, on U.S. guidance systems. The NSA or the Geospatial Institute would have been involved, and that means that it was a direct U.S. war. Nothing perfectly exposes the role of Ukraine as a proxy for the United States and the UK as a junior player than this, that the missiles won't even work without US intelligence sharing. And it's the intelligence sharing that is more devastating to Ukraine than even the cutoff in weapons. Europe's going to try to fill the gap there.